Hello, and once again, welcome to you in the macroeconomic class. Dear students, in the previous lecture, I have discussed with you about the aggregate demand and also discuss about the factors that why aggregate demand curve is downward sloping. So, in this lecture, I will be discussing with you about the shift factors in the aggregate demand. So let's start with the discussion of the aggregate demand curve. Aggregate demand curve. As we have discussed that aggregate demand it means it's the real GDP or the GDP of a country. So aggregate demand curve, it is the graph in the last lecture. I have also discussed about the aggregate demand. We just suppose say this is the aggregate demand curve 1. This one is the aggregate demand curve 0, original aggregate demand. Horizontally, we have to write the real GDP, and vertically, we have the price level. So, whenever the price level, we say suppose this is the price level, this is the quantity, this one is the GDP. If the price level is this one, if this price level, if price level falls, we have more GDP. And if the price level continues, just suppose we have this price level, we have this one, the real GDP. So vertically price level and horizontally the real GDP are the total output of a country that an economy can produce. So now we have to discuss about the shift factors. What are the shift factors? Are the factors causing shift in this aggregate demand curve? Shift means when we have the new line. So there are, as we have discussed in the previous lecture, that there is a formula or equation, simple equation. The Y is equal, Y is the total income of the country, or Y is the GDP, or you can simply say that real GDP is the consumption, investment, government expenditure, and X minus M, the net of the exports. So when we talk about the shift factor, any of these factors can cause a shift in the aggregate demand curve. That if the consumption of the people increases or decreases, it affects the shift or it affects the aggregate demand curve. And what are the factors causing the shift in the demand curve? And as we say that consumption of the people, it means Y minus T, or the disposable income of the people. When the disposable income of the people increases or decreases, it affects the aggregate demand. Disposable income is that income which people have to spend. When people pay all their dues or taxes. When someone pays everything or all obligations in form of the taxes or in form of the other expenses which, which they have to incur for earning of anything. So especially when we earn something and when we pay taxes, what remains is known as the disposable income. So if the disposable income increases, if the tax increases, if government increases the taxes, due to increase in the taxes, disposable income falls. Means whatever the price level we have, when we have discussed about the aggregate demand curve, we have assumed that all other factors they are not changing. Means the income of the consumers is not going to change, the interest rate is not going to change, or the investment is not going to change, the government spending is not going to change, and the exports or the rate of the export is not going to change. Means the other factors they are not changing. At these price levels, these are the quantities or the real GDP amounts. So first factor which is going to shift the demand curve, aggregate demand curve, is the disposable income, and especially when the taxes. When taxes increases, people's disposable income falls, so there will be inward shift. So suppose we say that there is an inward shift in the demand curve, aggregate demand curve. The other than the original one, this one is our suppose original, that when these factors are not going to change, when disposable income or the disposable income is that income which is directly related with the consumption factor. So when consumption is going to increase or decrease, it has impact on the aggregate demand curve. So when the taxes increases, it decreases the disposable income. So we have inward shift in the demand curve. And because of these factors, another factor which is very important, marginal propensity to consume. Because of the fear of the price level, because of the fear of the future inflation rates, just suppose people they are going to change their marginal propensity to consume. Means if suppose they are earning 1 rupee, from that 1 rupee, how much is their marginal propensity to consume and marginal propensity to save? It has direct impact on the overall spending of the people. So when marginal propensity to consume declines, people start selling more from their from their earnings because of future price rise fear. They start selling more. When they start selling more means their marginal propensity to sell increases, which directly decreases their marginal propensity to consume. If just suppose we say from 100 rupees previously they were spending 80% on the consumption and 20 for saving, but just suppose we say that now they are spending 70% for consumption and 30% they are selling, which means their marginal propensity to consume declines. So when marginal propensity to consume decline, their intention to buy less today and they wanted to save more for the future because of the fear of the prices, that in future prices will rise. So there will be inward shift in the demand curve, the demand will shift inward, and the vice versa. You can also say that when consumption increases, when the tax rate falls, it's not necessary that always taxes rise. Suppose tax falls, it increases the disposable income of the people. When disposable income of the people increases, just suppose we say they start buying more and we have new aggregate demand curve 2, and we can say that there is a outward shift in the, this one is the outward shift, and this one is the inward shift. Or this one is the rightward shift and this one is the leftward shift. So it's very simple to explain that whenever the disposable income of the people increases, they start spending more and the aggregate demand curve will shift outward or the rightward direction. It means now people are buying more at all available prices, and when disposable income falls, the people start buying less at all available prices. Another factor which is very important is the investment factor. Investment is the function of the interest rate. Investment is depending on the interest rate. That interest rate is, we have discussed in the previous classes also, that interest rate is the price of money. To invest, we need to borrow. The businesses, the private firms, they borrow from the different selling houses, the banks, the private investors, the individuals, and whenever, because of the fear of the inflation or because of the higher prices, people need more money to buy the required items. So there is a pressure on the spendings, there is a pressure on the money, available money. So when the money supply is not increasing according to the demand of the people, so the interest rate rises. So when interest rate rises or increases, firms they start buying more, firms they borrow less. So when interest increases, investment declines, the private investment declines, and that's why we have the inward shift. And the vice versa, when interest rate falls, there will be outward shift in the demand curve, aggregate demand curve, that when interest rate is low, people invest more, they borrow more money, and they establish new businesses, they enhance or increase their current businesses. So that's why it has the impact. And the government. Another factor is the government, that government is also increasing or decreasing its spending depending on the availability of the funds. Governments increase, when government increases its spending, there will be outward shift in the aggregate demand. When government decreases its spending, there will be inward shift in the demand curve, aggregate demand curve. And another factor, which is the nature of the exports, that nature of the exports is depending on the nature of the exports is the function of exchange rate. Exchange rate is very important. Exchange rate means it is the rate or the price of conversion of two currencies. It is the rate at which two currencies are converted. Means how many units of one currency required to buy one unit of another currency. So whenever the exports declines and the imports increases, due to the increase in the imports means when you are demanding more of the foreign currency goods, it means you are demanding more foreign currency, and when you are exporting less, it means foreigners need less of your currency, so it has the negative impact on your currency's value. When the value of your currency declines, then foreigners buy more from you, and your exports increases and your imports declines. So it has more outward impact on your aggregate demand. Means when your currency's value declines, people buy more from your country, but when exchange rate increases, when your currency's exchange value increases, it has impact on your overall trade balance, but the exchange rate has the impact on your interest rates. When you need to, when you are importing, you need more money to purchase the imported items. So because of this one, the interest rate within your country increases. So because of this exchange rate, interest rate impact, then there will be inward and outward shift. So if your exports are greater, then there will be outward shift. If your imports are more and your exports are less, there will be inward shift, and that is because of the exchange rate. So these are the factors which are causing the aggregate demand curve to shift rightward or leftward. So the real exchange rate rises. When the real exchange rate rises or increases, it has the impact on the exchange rate, and the exchange rate leads to the interest rate. When the exchange rate increases, then your interest rate also increases, and because of the interest rate increase, your exports decline. What happens when real exchange rate increase? It increases the real, it increases the exchange rate. When exchange rate increases, it increases interest rate increase. And when interest rate increase because of the real exchange rate increase, your exports will decline. So when exports decline, then there will be inward shift in the demand aggregate demand curve. There will be inward shift in the aggregate demand curve, and the vice versa. That when the real exchange rate falls, it decreases the exchange rate, it decreases the interest rate, and it increases the exports. So this is all about the aggregate demand. That aggregate demand means it's the GDP, total expenditure of the country, and we have discussed about the aggregate demand and aggregate demand curve factors. Then we have also discussed about the shift in the aggregate demand curve. These are the factors: the consumption factor, the investment factor, the government and the net of the exports. These are very important factors. They are they are causing some change in the aggregate demand curve. They are shifting it outward or leftward. Sometimes demand increases, sometimes demand decreases. And when we talk about the consumption factor, it means we are talking about the disposable income, and disposable income is related with the taxes, government's taxes, or it is also related with the marginal propensity to consume and marginal propensity to save, the people's decision that how much they are going to spend and how much they are going to save. And when we talk about the investment function, it's a private investment and it is also related that it's the function of the investment is the function of the interest rate. So interest rate is the price level. So whenever the interest rate rises, it shifts the demand curve towards the leftward direction, means there will be inward shift. And whenever the interest rate falls, then there will be outward shift. And then there is a government spending is there. Government spending when increases, we have the outward shift or the rightward shift in the demand curve and the vice versa. Then the net of the exports means exports have the impact on the exchange rates. So whenever the exports, whenever your real exchange rate increases, your exchange rate will increases and your interest rate will rises and ultimately your exports falls. So thank you for watching this video. Watch this video very carefully. Listen the terms which I have discussed in this lecture and note down the questions. If you feel any question and send me same, I will try to explain all your questions in my coming lectures. So thank you very much.